So as I said, my name is Faith Dukes. I am the K-12 STEM Education Program Manager here at Berkeley Lab. Berkeley Lab is one of 17 Department of Energy national laboratories where we do research that's fundamental to the nation. Today, we will be talking about soil science and composting. So if you haven't already, please download the information sheet from the K-12 education.lbl website. Please use the question and answer box as well as the chat box to talk with us. Some of you have already exercised that very well, so please continue to do that. We'll have the opening and introduction right now, as well as talking about why is composting so important and what it is in the first place, a look at what is soil, and then we'll go through our accelerated decomposition experiment. As I said, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory is one of 17 national laboratories under the head of the Department of Energy National Labs. We are located in Berkeley, California. And if you want to know more information about Berkeley Lab in particular, you can go to our website, lbl.gov. But also if you want to learn more in a fun way about the other Department of Energy National Laboratories, you can locate this interactive map at symmetrymagazine.org. This is a view of Berkeley Lab. I like to say it's one of the best views from a lab where we can see the 200-acre campus with 100 buildings over in the Berkeley Hills. We also have our neighbors from UC Berkeley below us and Lawrence Hall of Science above us. Today we're talking about sustainability and soil science. And if you've joined us before, you know that we talk about a variety of different applications, research, and to many scientists and engineers and STEM professionals at Berkeley Lab and around in the Bay Area. This is one of several live science events that we have, and we will continue to have them throughout the year where we can talk about different science, research, and solutions for the world. Some words of the day. So today we're talking about soil science, and we have some words that we will be saying: aerobes, arthropods, carbon, composting, culture, soil, microbes, nitrogen, and organic matter. Those are some important words that we will be going over today, and we've defined them again in that worksheet that we put together for you to download. And we'll be talking through them as we talk through the different pieces of thinking about composting and thinking about sustainability. So I invite you to ask us questions, as many as possible. In the chat box, we'll be reviewing them, and I want to actually introduce one of our coordinators for this program and for this series, Jennifer Johnson, who is a senior researcher at the Joint Genome Institute. So Jennifer, thanks for joining us, and happy to see you as well.
Hi, everyone.
All right, so Jennifer has been a researcher at Berkeley Lab, and she's also been helping out in the education and outreach at JGI as well, the Joint Genome Institute. And she also makes sure that we get all of the questions that we need answered in our chat box and in our Q&A. Anything else you want to tell them, Jennifer, that I might have forgotten?
Nope, that's it. But definitely make sure to ask questions. I'll get them answered for you.
Okay. Thanks, Jennifer. All right, so our big topic for the day is composting. And so to answer the question, why is it so important, I'm going to invite one of our first presenters and a scientist, Stephanie, to answer that question. So Stephanie, can you answer that question for us?
Of course. Hi, I'm Stephanie Chacon, and I am a soil scientist, and I'm currently working at Berkeley National Lab as a postdoctoral researcher. And I do scientific research in how microbes influence organic matter cycling, and I happen to be able to go to Panama to the tropics to do so. So what are some of the benefits of composting? Well, there's a lot of benefits. A lot of our food is grown and harvested from soil. And soil has nutrients and water to grow these plants. And the act of harvesting those crops from the soil can remove organic matter. So to preserve this natural resource, we need to replenish it. And the act of composting takes advantage of a process that occurs in soil called decomposition. And that basically can take recycled material, food scraps, and leaves and make it into something that is similar to what is in the soil. So we can take compost and add it to the soil. And by doing that, we add organic matter. And that helps in a multitude of ways. One, we add nutrients back to the soil, which is really important because we're removing it. Nutrients when we harvest plants. It also, a lot of soils with high organic matter, they retain a lot of water. So the more organic matter you add, the higher amount of water you can hold in your soil. It also glues the soil together. So when you're removing organic matter from soil, we're actually making it more susceptible to erosion. So adding compost or organic matter actually enhances and the soil structure and decreases the chances of soil from being blown away. The act of adding compost also fertilizes the soil. So it reduces the needs of synthetic fertilizers like ammonium and nitrates. And one of the big benefits is that the food waste doesn't go to the landfills. So landfills can only take up so much material. And so by removing the food waste, one, we reduce the food waste and recycle it, but we also prevent the compost from being, or sorry, not the compost, but the organic matter from food waste to start to decompose anaerobically, not with no oxygen, and that creates a very harmful greenhouse gas such as methane. So we reduce the amount of methane being generated in our landfills. So these are just some of the benefits in composting. And so I keep, so to summarize, we can recycle material, we replenish materials, we're limiting methane emissions, loss of fertility, erosion. So, I think I keep talking about soil as an important natural resource, but what exactly is soil? Soil is a natural body comprised of, solids and liquids. Really, that means organic matter, mineral, water, and air. And they occur in layers on the land surface. And it's characterized by horizonation or layers. As you can see in those pictures, soil has many different layers of different colors, of different textures, and the soil is distinguishable from rocks because these rocks have transformed through chemical and physical weathering into, and losses and additions and transformations, and all this energy and matter has been transformed, and it has the ability to sustain rooted plants, in natural environments. And soil provides us with a plant medium to grow our food. It sustains our forests, our grasslands. It cleans water. It retains nutrients. So it's an extremely important soil is extremely important in the fight for climate change, as well as just an important natural body. So when we think of composting, it's essentially an accelerated decomposition experiment of organic matter, which naturally occurs in soil, and it's responsible for the fertility of a lot of agricultural land. So it's a great way to start trying to be more sustainable. And so if you want to start composting, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sarah, who's already started her own compost bin, and I'm sure she can definitely help.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Sarah Gishgari-Doyle, and I'm a postdoctoral scientist at LBL studying ecology. And I study the microbes that are living in the sediment below the soil, so at least like 3 feet below the ground surface. And I love microbiology. And helping me out today is my colleague, Moon.
Hi, I'm Moon. I'm also a postdoctoral researcher at LBL at the Department of Ecology. I am working with environmental microbes from the deep subsurface and also from the roots of plants. So Sarah, today I'm thinking about starting my own compost bin. So what should we do to start?
All right, well, happy to help you start your compost bin. The first thing we need is a bin. So you're going to want to keep your bin outside if you can. The type of bin that you choose will be different depending on how much space you have. You can have a kitchen compost bin that you use to collect your food scraps inside before you add it to the yard debris, or your green bin if you live here in the Bay Area, for your city waste management. If you're going to compost at home though, you can have a 5-gallon bucket that you keep on your patio or in your yard somewhere, or if you have a really big backyard, You can have a fancy commercial compost bin, or even better, build one yourself that has an open bottom out of like 4x4s and chicken wire.
Okay, so I have this bin here, and I think this is what I will use to as my compost bin. And now my question is, where can I put these?
Well, if you live in an apartment, you can put it on your balcony or patio. If you have a bigger backyard, you can really put it anywhere outside, but you might consider doing an open bottom pile if you have a big backyard, so all the microbes in the soil can get up into your compost.
Okay, so since I live in an apartment, I think I'll put my bin on my balcony. So now my next question is, what can I put it in? Or what can I put inside?
Great question. So it's important to have different types of material in your compost. And we talk about these and divide them into greens and browns.
So does it just mean based on colors?
Not exactly. Maybe our friend Shweta can help us out here.
Hi everyone, I'm Shweta Acharya and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Ecology and Joint Genome Institute at Berkeley Lab. I study how microbes can help in cleaning up wastewater. Back to the question on greens and browns. Greens are typically organic matter with a lot of nitrogen and nutrients. They are usually green colored, such as veggies, food scraps, and grass clippings. That's why we call them greens. But coffee grounds also have a lot of nitrogen and eggshells have calcium. So they also fall into the category of greens because of their high nutrient content. Browns are materials with a lot of carbon and low nitrogen content. They're typically things like fall leaves, straw or hay, and chipped tree barks and twigs, hence browns. Paper and corn stalks also are considered browns. To explain greens and browns in scientific terms, we try to divide them based on the number of carbon atoms for each nitrogen atom, simply termed as carbon to nitrogen ratio. As you can see in the example, browns have higher carbon to nitrogen ratio compared to the greens. The idea behind mixing browns and greens together to create a compost is to actually create an environment of ideal carbon to nitrogen ratio that supports the growth of desirable microbes in the compost. To summarize, the final carbon to nitrogen ratio of the compost should be in the range of 25:1 to 40:1, which you can see can't be achieved by using either one or the other of browns and greens. Hence, balancing browns and greens is essential to make a good compost. We would like to hear from the audience what they are planning to put in their compost bin. Please use the chat box to answer.
So some of the entries coming in are coffee grounds, eggs, grass and twigs, food waste like fruits, mostly greens, and banana peels.
Cool. So since I have my compost bucket ready, and I also have some things that I would like to put. So I have some browns here that are from my garden clippings. Then I have some cauliflower stems from dinner last night. So I'm going to put these two together as well. And I have some of these like fruits, like citruses and lemons. Should I put them in as well?
No, not the lemons.
Oh, why?
So you shouldn't put citrus in your compost because it's so high in acid, and the acidity can create a bad environment for the microbes.
Okay. So how about, I mean, these are green, right? But how about other things that looks brown, like meat or bones, things like that?
No, not meat either for this one. Maybe Stephanie can explain why.
Yes. So if you're making a compost bin at home, you have to be careful what you add. First, if you're trying to use your compost for your vegetable garden, you want to make sure that any of your like grass clippings or your greens didn't come into contact with a systemic herbicide, right? Because then in the compost, pile, they might survive, and then you're adding a herbicide to your garden, which might hurt your broadleaf plants. So another thing to avoid too is not adding meats, veggies, and dairy. And I think someone was asking about corn-based litter, cat litter. No, do not add those things. The reason why is because the compost pile at home can't really generate the conditions long enough to be able to decompose these components. One, they attract a lot of pests, so flies, maggots, and you may not want to deal with that. Another thing is the time it takes and the temperature it takes to break these down safely may not be achieved in a small compost pile at home. So you want to make sure that to kill human pathogens, it's actually one of the ways the compost heat kills human pathogens. And these conditions can be easily achieved in like industrial scale, like your waste management compost bins. And they are able to sieve things and separate things that are more decomposed and less decomposed. And they're able to do that at the industrial scale, but not at a scale that you can easily achieve and manage at home.
Well, otherwise that looks great, Moon. In my compost at home, I put pepper and Brussels sprout leftovers from dinner, clippings from the tomato plant in my garden, and litter from the redwood tree that grows in my backyard. It drops a lot of twigs and leaves and stuff.
Okay, so I have everything in my compost bin. Am I ready to go? Is there anything else I have to do?
In addition to adding the organic material that we just added, the microbes in there also need oxygen and water to break down the compost. I added water with a hose when it looked too dry and stirred it frequently to make sure that enough air was getting in. You might be wondering why stirring is so important. Just like how humans breathe oxygen and eat food, like your breakfast cereal this morning, microbes need to eat and breathe too. The ones that we want in our compost breathe oxygen just like us. We want the oxygen-breathing microbes, which we call aerobes, to be in the compost because they help break down the organic matter faster than all of the other types of microbes. And we want this process to go as fast as possible.
Okay, so just a reminder, microbes or microorganisms are these extremely tiny organisms that can only be seen under a microscope. Then they are one of the most diverse organisms, and they include bacteria, archaea, protists, and to name a few. And they're responsible for a lot of processes in nature, and they're also found everywhere, including on our body, and also definitely in our compost. So we have a question for you. Why do we give the microbes oxygen and water? If you could just type your questions in the chat box, that would be great.
We have a lot of answers coming in with grow, multiply.
For sure. Yes, so Liv? Yes, so for the microbes to grow, they need food. In a way, the organic matter and the compost that we're giving is going to be the food for them, but they need oxygen and water so that they can then breathe and degrade the food that they are then that's in the organic matter in the compost. So
All right, so here's a picture of my compost 10 days after I put everything in the bin. You can see that the leaves are starting to wilt a little bit, but things don't really look that much different. I also took a sample to look at in the laboratory, but we'll get to that a little bit later.
So what's it's happening in the first few days of our compost?
Okay, so right now, first couple of days in the compost, what's going on is the organisms are beginning to physically and chemically break down that organic matter you just added. And they do this within the water films, but they also, this is why they need, as you all said, oxygen and water, just like we do when we eat our food. The I'm showing here what we call the shredders, which is a really cool name just because they physically break down the organic matter into tiny little pieces. And that's how like we chew our food to be able to make it small. But in this case, you have arthropods, mites, and other organisms. And just like in these pictures, I'm showing snow bugs and millipedes. And these are the ones that are breaking down the large pieces into small pieces. And once the pieces are small enough, then the microbes can do the work.
The microbes can then break down the brown and green stuff in your compost bin, but microbes do not have mouths like the shredders do. So they digest the pieces with the enzymes and absorb them into their bodies. Once the organic matter is inside, they can use them for energy generation and grow and discard the excess. So this breakdown of organic matter by microbes starts to shift the carbon to nitrogen ratio that we talked about earlier.
So similar to a fire, a chemical breakdown of these type of organic matter, it generates carbon, right? In the presence of oxygen, they release carbon dioxide, water, and heat. And so, except these are mediated by organisms, as we talked above, with enzymes. And as the organisms break down the organic matter, they generate a lot of heat. In a compost pile, the temperature starts to rise, and then the microbes that are adapted to that specific temperature will become, they start to grow. And this is, so right in that graph, it's a little complicated. It's usually what, a scientist tries to show a lot of these processes. So of what's going on over a compost pile over 200 days. So we're going to simplify it. So I made a little animation. And so what I'm trying to show is temperature in the red. And in these little circles, the little circles, the black circles, I have blues and greens and some orange microbes. And that's just trying to show that these microbes are abundant, but each one is differently adapted to a temperature. So as they're starting to break down that organic matter, they're generating heat, and that pile starts to get hot. And so as you go a little higher from room temperature to about 113 degrees Fahrenheit, that's where like what we call the mesophiles, they like it that temperature and they're very abundant. But when it goes over that temperature, they start to die because they're not very good at growing at that temperature. And so their bodies become food. And then as you go hotter and hotter and hotter, you're actually getting more microbes that are adapted to hotter temperatures. And so they start to eat all the turnover or the material of the dead microbes. And so this is multiple cycles going on in your compost pile, and it gets hot. In fact, there are temperatures that can go up to, even within a week of your compost bin, if you have a nice big pile, it can go up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature needed to cook a chicken. So it's hot. And yeah. And so eventually over time, the pile starts to mature. And so that's why, you have to add water because it's evaporating. And so it starts to mature, and then you start seeing the cool down. And then those thermophilic or the heat loving microbes start to die off. And then we start shifting that microbial community again. So temperature is always a great indicator of a working compost pile.
Okay, so to recap, the raw materials that we're putting into our compost, like the vegetables and the tree cuttings that I've just put, contains organic matter that's made up of various ratios of carbon and nitrogen, as we talked about, and also, of course, other nutrients. And both organisms, big and small, like the bugs and the worms, and down to microbes, they then break down these organic matter while breathing oxygen to gain the energy that they need to grow. And during this composting process, it produces heat and water and carbon dioxide. And at the end of it, our compost would turn into something that would contain more or less the same thing, but more in a degraded forms. And like we would get things called humus, which is in the organic matter of the soil, or the organic component of the soil. So now we know what to do, but before that, I just want to ask, what are the things that we could expect, or no, sorry. Yeah, so now we know what we need to expect. I want to ask Shweta, what kind of things that could also happen that I should not expect?
Well, a good compost pile can smell earthy, but if you're not stirring enough, it may start to smell like rotten eggs. And you will also have a lot of critters in the compost bin, like we already discussed, just like in the soil. However, there are some critters that you don't want in your compost pile. If you have a compost pile, compost pit which is outside, and if you don't mix it often, critters like rats, raccoons, skunks can visit and eat the food scraps. Bees and yellow jackets can make a nest inside the piles, and you can even sting you if it is disturbed. It could also become breeding grounds for flies, so you have to be very careful. Additionally, though pillow bugs and sow bugs and even slugs are not particularly harmful, they kind of hang around in the compost. If there are a large number of these critters, that can indicate that the compost is too wet and there's something that's not really going well there. So how do we address these issues? So if you're getting nasty smell like rotten eggs, that means the compost lacks oxygen or is too wet. Such conditions make microbes generate things like hydrogen sulfide, what you associate with a rotten egg. So make sure you immediately mix the pile and add more brown stuff to make it more fluffy. Another issue is like if you suspect the compost is too wet, just grab a bit of compost, try to squeeze it, and maybe it should be moist, maybe drip a little, but not a lot of water coming out. If there is a lot of water, then stop watering for a while and let it dry out and add more browns to it. Another thing could be to avoid these unfriendly visitors like rats or skunks or flies. Make sure to turn the compost pile regularly. You could also cover the food scraps with soil to avoid and also avoid adding dairy or meat products to this food, to this compost pile that attracts rats or skunks and thus deterring them from visiting your compost pile. And again, if your compost pile is too dense and not warming up, not heating up, then you can add more brown stuff and a little bit more water. Don't forget to mix it. So you want the compost pile to be moist as well as fluffy.
All right, so the compost experiment I'm showing you guys in pictures today, I only got to day 30 so far. But here's a picture of the compost that I started 30 days after I put everything in the bin. With some of the material, you can't tell what it used to be, and that's good. With other material, especially the fibers and the pieces that came from the tree, you can still see the original shapes and colors, which means that my compost still has a ways to go. And here's the compost at each of those time points that we talked about. You can see the material changing over time. All right, now my favorite part. Remember how I took that sample to look at in the lab on day 10? So I took a video using our microscope in the laboratory to see the microbes in it. This video is magnified 1,000 times for normal vision, and you can see all of the microbes moving around. Look at them go. Ah. Microbiology is so cool, guys.
Cool. That was a really good video. I enjoyed it. Yeah, so let's say if we don't have a microscope at home, how do we know that it's done, that it's working?
So again, just like Sarah said, your pile basically goes something from recognizable greens and material and generates a lot of steam over time, and then it should cool down. And then it should turn into this dark material with very small pieces of what originally started. Almost no greens should be left in there. And so when we go to the second pile, you can see here we started off with grass clippings and straw. And so these are all what we started with. And eventually the pile also goes from 1 meter high to less than 1 foot. So we lose volume. And so here I'm showing a really beautiful picture of what you can actually get from a compost facility, a finished compost. You see there that came from essentially your yard debris and all your food scraps, and turns into this really fine particles. It's really dark, it's black, and that means lots of organic matter. And that's one of the main reasons why farmers and gardeners like to call compost black gold. So I wanted to ask a question to the audience and see if you can put your answer in the chat box. What would you do with your compost?
We have fertilized garden veggies, used to plant herbs and plant in classroom, spread in the garden. Grow more compost.
Yeah,
Add to my plants as fertilizer.
well, that's all great ways to use compost. So for those at home asking, you know, how can we learn more about research around agriculture and sustainabilities? For that answer, we're going to transition to our friends at Science at Cal. So Dee, can you help us out?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, my name is Dee, and I work for UC Berkeley at Science at Cal. We create opportunities for the scientists to engage with people like you. So everyone here can get involved in science through programming like the one you're watching now. And if you want, you can go to our website. I did add the website on the slide. It's coming through on the chat box. And you can hear more about programs just like this one. We also, when the world is back to normal, we will be at farmers markets and we will be at all the science festivals and just different ways in which you can get involved with all the research at Cal. I want to point you to two slides about two different programs. The first one is just at the Sustainability at Cal website. And again, that website is going to come through on the chat box. And I couldn't even pick. Look at all these programs that Cal has that you can get involved in, either in terms of sustainability. There's lots of zero waste programs, ways that you can get involved in community programs, not just at the university, but around the Berkeley and East Bay communities. The second program I wanted to talk about was a program called CLEAR, and that's also going to come in through the chat box. And this is a program, it stands for Communication, Literacy, and Education for Agricultural Research. And this, I think, Faith, if you click a little bit more, there might be more things that pop up. Yes, okay, it's an active slide. CLEAR works with folks on campus, CLEAR works with folks in the community, CLEAR works in classrooms, and also at the Capitol. So this is a way that the researchers and the research that's going on at Berkeley, again, meets the needs of the public through public programming and classroom education and policy making. So a very cool program if you want to check it out and learn more about all the ways that you can engage with scientists through CLEAR. So I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to share these resources with you all. And I'm pretty sure Lawrence Berkeley National Lab has their own set of resources. So I'm going to throw the table back to Faith so she can explain some more of resources coming from you guys at LBNL.
Sure. And so there's clearprojects.org down there on the website. And then for those of us who are here at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, I know there are some staff members who are joining today. Please look at the Sustainable Berkeley Lab site to talk about ways in which we can be sustainable while we're at work. This is a website that's available, and we have all of these organizations that have been mentioned, including the Sustainable Berkeley Lab, mentioned in the worksheet that we've developed for today. So you guys can click on that, as well as a description of the careers and the research that all of our presenters do in their laboratories. So you can read a little bit more about Stephanie, Sarah, Moon, and Shweta within that document. So I'd like to thank you guys all for participating. and to join us in a couple of weeks where we'll talk about science in the sky. So we'll be doing an interactive live science series to talk about atmospheric rivers, and some community science. We'll be asking people to actually put in data and do a little research with us in that session. So I'm going to stop sharing my slide actually and allow you to ask any additional questions that you may have had for our researchers today, as well as anything that you want to know about Berkeley Lab. I know a few people were asking about, is there an email to reach sustainability at Cal Department? See if you know about that. But if you have any questions for our researchers as well, please, this is your time to talk to them, to ask them any questions about their profession, about their research, and they all don't all do work in composting. They all do work around soil ecology, microbiology, and most are under the Earth and Environmental Sciences area here at Berkeley Lab. So feel free to take a few minutes to ask questions that we'll have for the next 15 minutes. Our first one, what is your view on aquaponics or hydroponics?
Oh boy. That's a big question that I get. A lot of people are like, we can grow all our food in hydroponics. That's not necessarily true. Less than 10% of our food is probably in hydroponics. Sorry about that, my cat's in the background. But most of the food we grow is from soil. The reason is because the roots need to be, have enough water and enough air, or else they'll rot. So a lot of big issues with hydroponics, and in fact, there's a lot of places, agricultural places that have issues with it being too wet, and so the food rots essentially. And so hydroponics is really just more of only very few plants that are adapted to in water, and so it's not going to be able to sustain the amount of food that we need.
I have another question coming through that says, how can I get creative if I'd like students to make compost with our at-home material? So I'm guessing in this COVID space, we could really engage with students at home. So how could a teacher do that?
Yeah, I mean, the things that you can find down the street and, really anywhere in your outdoor environment, even here in cities, can be really helpful for compost. It doesn't have to be any specific types of vegetables or anything like that. It's a fun activity to go out for a walk and collect things for it if you don't have your own backyard at home too.
And this is a reminder that this is recorded, right? So even if you want to share this presentation with your classroom later on.
So another question.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Faith.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
If you're building a compost bin, can you use wood?
I can answer that. I think if you have the compost bin outside, I think you can build something that's 4x4. And yeah, it's also in the slides from earlier, you can see that there are some pictures of bins made out of wood. I would say that there might be a limited time of how long you can use it, just because wood will also degrade over time, but I'm talking really long-term scales. So definitely you can do that.
To add on to that, a lot of the wood that you can buy at places like Home Depot are treated for outdoors, or you can get something to treat it for outdoors if you are worried about the wood itself decomposing.
This is another great question. Oh, I'm sorry. Answer on that.
Oh, no, yeah. But this is why sometimes, so I started learning how to compost in Oregon, and it rains 9 months out of the year. So sometimes even using cedar, although that's a little bit more pricey, but also just using chicken wire, maybe creating the base of it, just kind of like a hollow box. And then you can put chicken wire, and then eventually it takes about 5 years or more for the wood to start kind of getting destable. And then you can replace it with something and then shred it and compost that.
great answers. So how many different microbes exist in a typical compost pile? What do you guys say? This is an orders of magnitude question, right?
Billions at least. Even in like a cubic centimeter of soil. So think about like how teeny tiny that is. There's like a billion organisms in there. So in your compost pile, especially if you have one that's more than just a 5-gallon bucket, man.
So this next one is more of a roundtable question. How did you get inspired to pursue the areas of study in your career paths?
I'll start. So I started school and college as an architect. I hopped around a lot. I went to engineering and finally got involved in civil engineering and water treatment. And from there, I got into the microbiology side of it. So I took a very roundabout way to get to microbial ecology, but found my home. And so, you know, test out a lot of different things, right? You never know what's going to pique your interest.
Yeah, for me, I would say it's that video of microbes, that the feeling that you get when you look down a microscope for the first time, and you're like, what? There's so many things going on, and so much active, and the whole time they're there, and that realization was really crucial for me. And then that sort of, sparked me towards like, oh yeah, I want to do microbiology, and just somehow, one after another, I got here.
Yeah, I think I was always, I grew up in India, and I was always bothered by this environmental pollution and such issues. And it was then I decided that I will try to use natural methods to combat pollution. And one thing led to another, and I ended up learning microbiology as a biochemical engineer. And then I worked more towards treating water and wastewater. That's how I am currently even doing that. So yeah, my interest it came from an environmental issue and then into microbiology to help treat pollution.
So I fell in love with chemistry when I was like 13 years old. And it was like my teacher that showed like trying to make a little light bulb with like steel wool and a 9-volt battery, and just the excitement, she was like Miss Frizzle, but like black hair. That's the best way I can describe her, Miss Ogilvy. And I had an awesome high school teacher in chemistry. So I actually got my bachelor's in chemistry. I thought I'm going to be a chemist. And when I was doing research in undergrad, I started working with Dr. Steve Allison at UC Irvine. And one of the biggest things that everyone kept saying, like, what is soil organic matter? Why is it there? All these questions. And one of the biggest shocking things that I was hearing was that we know more about planets and galaxies and everything than we know about soil. In fact, that billion in a single pinch wasn't even really known until like recently, because we can only really culture microbes like less than 2%. So 98% of the biodiversity, those billions, we didn't even know until we started getting, fancy DNA sequencing techniques. So I went in and I, got my bachelor's in chemistry and biochemistry, and all of those tools, the physics, the math, the biology, you need all of that in soil, because soil is like the interface of all of that. And then you deal with tiny, tiny scales and then huge landscapes to like up a mountain range. And so it's one of the biggest scientific frontiers. And I think that's why, I went in, and the soil people call me a chemist. The chemists call me a dirt doctor. So, it's a big field, and we are advancing at just discovering things that are changing the world.
Those were all such fascinating answers. It seems like everyone's kind of coming in it from a different direction, which is great for science, right? We need diversity, and we need diversity in subject and folks. So the next question was, there was a comment about not throwing in greens with herbicides. So how do you really get around that? Is foraging for greens the best way to go then?
So, does anyone else want to? So one of the things is sometimes people love their manicured lawns and they try to treat it with weeds. And so if you're like, oh, here's all these grass clippings, and if you don't leave it on the ground, you might want to compost it. Now, sometimes those herbicides might go into your compost. So usually, like, if you're not spraying anything, you can just take those things and compost it. Just be careful with the acidity, right? The limes. At a large industrial scale, you don't have to, there's no problem. But at home, in fact, when we were doing an experiment with students at a university, we found out that the compost didn't work. It never got hot. And it was because we got bedding, straw bedding from cows that had antibiotics. And so it went into the straw and it just never worked. So we didn't get enough microbes. So that's one of the things, you just got to be mindful of where it comes from. But if you can just grab grass clippings, you're not spraying anything, or your leaves, you know, when you're like raking your lawn, that's all perfect for a compost.
Hey, Jen, you're muted.
I do this all the time. I'm so sorry. All right, so our next question is about how big is the biggest compost bin, or do you know where the biggest compost bin is located?
I don't think there's bins big enough for the ones that I see at like city managed, like municipalities. They're just piles. Like I'm not kidding. It's like a block, a city block. It's just a piles, rows and rows of compost. And they have machines that like turn it. And it's just like, at that point, it's just, you don't have a bin, you just have space.
All right, and we have one question that just came in, because I know we talked about how many microbes are in compost, but how many types of microorganisms exist? This looks like not even in compost, just exist in the world. What do you guys think?
Wow. Well,
that's an answer for you ladies.
Well, Stephanie had said a number 2% of being ones that we could grow in the laboratory. And that's talking about only like bacteria and archaea, which are not even all of the types that Moon had talked about before with all, the protists and everything else. So honestly, we have no idea, but it's many, many more than we know about now.
And it also depends on like, when do you distinguish what is different, right? We're all the same species, but we're all very different. And yet microbes, same thing, genetic, DNA will be like, 97% difference in their DNA. That means they're different species. We're actually moving away from that too. So you ask that same question and then someone asks, wait, what's different species? Then you'll have a whole conference of it because it's just not. We were still disagreed with that.
All right, so another question. Why would it be important for a student interested in fashion, for example, to know that 98% of different species of microbes are discovered? So why be non-scientists? Why is this important to them?
Well, here, I've been talking a lot. Shweta or Moon, do you want to jump in?
I can say something about fashion maybe. So recently, I saw that you have these fungi, which are also microbes. They make these filaments called mycelium, and when you produce enough mycelium, you can start to make things like leather. So in this case, you're doing the leather that you're making is cruelty-free and is also sustainable. It degrades faster. So in that case, that could be like a direction that we can go towards in terms of sustainability, also in terms of fashion. So, and I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more examples that are out there, but this is something that I just thought of. So, I mean, the fact that, there's so many microbes and they're just so everywhere and they're just growing by themselves. I think that we should be, if we can tap into that, think we can get a lot of things out of that.
I would like to add a point as well. Just like Moon said, a lot of these microbes produce enzymes which are used to treat textile and other, in fact, even surfactants are being produced by microbes, which can operate at higher temperature and such nice features that not only makes them good to use on a large scale, but also like they are environmentally friendly. So there are even reports of using microbial enzymes to actually bleach the clothes and textiles as opposed to the regular traditional methods where they use a lot of chemicals. So this could also be a reason why we should know more about the microbial diversity and find out what potential enzymes they can produce that we could use commercially and also save our planet from further pollution. So yeah, there are different aspects to understanding microbial diversity.
Yeah, so another thing, you know, medicine. Penicillin was from a soil microbe. And the task of trying to culture soil microbes actually just recently generated new organisms because they're trying to figure out how to culture them, and then found out 14 different antibiotics that work on MRSA and tuberculosis and things that are just things that we're actually running out of treatment. So we're finding out, just studying microbes, we're getting antibiotics that are going to be able to save lives. And even their like warfare, someone was trying to learn how to like, why are these microbes attacking each other in deserts? So like biocrust, they found a chemical that is now a chemotherapy agent. So a chemical that works to fight cancer, and it was made by a microbe. And so we also just finding out mimicry, like figuring out how they work, we might be able to get new technology to develop super glues that maybe are resistant to breaking things. Like it's endless. And in fact, we don't know what we might find, but we should go look for it.
I think that's a great topic that you just brought up, because one of the other questions was, could students answer this question for themselves? And yes, right, science students are doing that.
One more question that just came in. Is it important to revolve the mixture? What happens if you don't, I think mix the compost? Is it because oxygen and moisture? You need to mix oxygen and moisture, is that why?
Yes, essentially by mixing, you introduce more air into the mixture, and that prevents it from going anaerobic, where otherwise if you don't mix it well, the microbes start degrading, and once they run out of oxygen, they start doing anaerobic digestion, and you can develop smells and things like that. So by regularly mixing, you also introduce oxygen, and that way your compost will degrade faster and will not smell bad.
I think that's a good stopping point for us, and a good thing for a reminder if you're starting your composting to keep mixing, adding water. Make sure you keep all critters away. Don't use dairy or meat unless you have a large industrial composting center that you're building in your backyard. And please continue to join us for these live science series. We'll do our next one on July 31st. And we'll be talking about atmospheric rivers. So we'll still be talking to our scientists from the Earth Environmental and Sciences area, as well as we'll be joined by our friends at Science at Cal. Dee Rossiter will be helping us out with that one as well. And thank you to our presenters again for working on this and for sharing your vast knowledge on microbes and your excitement for science. And we look forward to having you back at some other time to talk about more science. And for everybody who stayed online, thanks for joining us, and have a great weekend.